EVO.
Welcome back to the Ides of April. This week, we're going to take a deep dive into the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. This is called The House of Kennedy: Power, Fortune, and Tragedy. There are American families, and then there are American myths. The Kennedys, long before history hollowed them into legend, were flesh and ambition. Catholic, Irish, uninvited to the tables of America's early aristocracy, and determined to build their own. Their story begins not with a martyrdom in Dallas or a gunshot in a Los Angeles hotel pantry, but by a patriarch whose hunger for influence was matched only by his genius for acquiring it. Joseph Patrick Kennedy Sr. was not born into wealth. He carved it, built it, brick by brick, deal by deal, compromise by compromise. And the story of how he did it is rarely told straight. Official histories prefer the glossed version, the charming Boston entrepreneur who married well, invested smartly, and built an empire. But the truth, the necessary truth, is sharper. Joseph Kennedy became rich because he understood America better than America understood itself. He knew that power pooled where money changed hands, and that money pooled wherever the rules blurred. In the 1910s and 20s, that blur was Hollywood. The film business was a frontier. It was lawless, chaotic, and dripping with cash. Joseph Kennedy saw what others didn't, that the studios weren't just making movies. They were making culture, and he wanted a hand in the machine. He bought failing studios and revived them. He bought successful studios and bled them. He slept with stars, he sweet-talked moguls, and positioned himself as a kind of unofficial kingmaker in an industry that was still figuring out what a kingmaker was. But then came Prohibition, gift-wrapped in moral panic. While the rest of the country was debating virtue, Kennedy was importing liquor legally through government license he secured by outmaneuvering rivals and outcharming federal regulators. When the ban ended, he controlled distribution channels up and down the East Coast. It wasn't bootlegging. It wasn't exactly clean either. It was America, and it was executed with precision. By the end of the 1930s, Joseph Kennedy was a millionaire many, many times over. But wealth was only the preface. The book he wanted to write was political, and for that, he needed sons. The patriarch's dream was straightforward: place a Kennedy in the White House. Preferably Joseph Jr., the eldest, the golden boy, the one crafted from birth to carry the full weight of his father's ambition. Joseph Jr. was raised not just to succeed, but to dominate. He boxed, he flew airplanes, he studied, he spoke with the cadence of a man already writing his acceptance speech. When World War II came, he enlisted with a fervor that bordered on destiny. His bombing missions over Europe were hellish. They were dangerous, and they were relentless. And still, he volunteered for more and more dangerous missions, more ambitious missions, missions that fused patriotism with the intoxicating call of legacy. Then came Operation Aphrodite, August 12, 1944. A top-secret program involving explosive-laden planes converted into early, crude drones. A technology decades ahead of its time and catastrophically unstable. Joseph Jr. climbed into one of those planes, its fuselage packed with Torpex, its controls rewired by engineers who hoped more than trusted, that the plane would respond as intended. It didn't. The explosion tore through the English sky with the violence of a star being born and dying within the same breath. There were no remains to bury, no final words. No legacy left behind, except the one that shifted instantly and irrevocably to his younger brother, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Jack, to those who loved him, had not been meant to carry the weight of the dynasty. That weight belonged to Joe. But with one violent eruption over the coast of Suffolk, the Kennedy future rearranged itself. In a way he never chose, Jack became the heir to the most ambitious political dream in America. And Bobby became the shield. Robert Francis Kennedy was different from his father and his brothers. He wasn't built from the same glossy material. He was quieter. He was sharper, more introspective. While Jack inherited charm and Joe inherited bravado, Bobby inherited something altogether more dangerous: conviction. He grew up in the long shadow of his father's expectations, but where the older Kennedy men sought power externally, in boardrooms and banks, ballot boxes, Bobby turned inward. He believed in fairness with a fire that could be mistaken for anger, and sometimes was. When Jack's political ascent began, Bobby positioned himself as the quiet architect. He ran Jack's Senate campaign in 1952, invisible to the crowds, but indispensable behind the scenes. When Jack ran for president in 1960, Bobby became campaign manager. When Jack ran for president in 1960, Bobby became campaign manager, strategist, fixer, conscience, and sword arm, roles that often collided with his father's ambitions and Jack's carefully cultivated charm. It was Bobby who wrestled with the Steelworkers Union to avoid a strike that could have sunk Jack's election chances. It was Bobby who sparred with Lyndon Johnson behind closed doors. It was Bobby who waged political war on anyone who threatened the Kennedy machine. And it was Bobby who followed Jack into the White House. Attorney General at 35, the youngest in U.S. history, the most loyal in U.S. history, and the most feared in U.S. history. While Jack mastered diplomacy on the surface, Bobby did the knife work below it, tangling with the mafia, pushing back against J. Edgar Hoover, navigating the volatile swamp of Cold War intelligence, and serving as the emotional ballast for a president whose health was far worse than the public ever knew. But perhaps the most profound moment of Bobby's early political life came during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Behind the scenes, he served as the intermediary between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was Bobby who negotiated the secret deal. The U.S. would remove missiles from Turkey if the Soviets removed theirs from Cuba. It was Bobby who stared into the abyss of nuclear war and spoke with the clarity of a man whose brother's life and whose own hung in the balance. Bobby Kennedy's public life didn't begin in the White House, but it was forged there, in crisis, in grief, in the loss of his brother in 1963, in the shattering of the Kennedy myth at Dealey Plaza, and in the slow, steady rise of a man who would become, almost against his will, the moral center of a country coming apart at the seams. The House of Kennedy was built on ambition, wealth, loss, and reinvention. But it was also built on tragedy. Tragedy so consistent it almost seemed inherited. By the time Bobby reemerged in public life in 1968, he carried the weight of a fallen brother, a fractured nation, and a country losing faith in its own institutions. And yet somehow, he stood as the one figure who might still pull America back from the edge. Next, we turn to the brothers, Jack and Bobby, and the crucible that transformed Robert F. Kennedy from campaign strategist and attorney general into the unlikely moral voice of a generation on the brink. Chapter 2, The Brothers and the Burden, from Cuba to Dallas. The Kennedys were never simply a family. They operated more like an ecosystem. Each brother a force of nature, each carrying pressures and destinies no single human should shoulder alone. If Joseph Kennedy Sr. imagined his sons as instruments of influence, then history, indifferent as ever, recast them as symbols. But before they were symbols, they were just brothers. They were Jack and Bobby, two men linked not just by blood, but by a shared gravitational pull that shaped every decision they made in the decade leading up to the 1960s, and ultimately reshaped America itself. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the reluctant heir after Joe's death, rose to power with a charm so effortless it almost disguised the pain beneath it. The chronic illnesses, the Addison's disease, the back brace, the constant threat of collapse behind that Hollywood smile. Now, Bobby knew all of it. Bobby saw all of it. And in almost every critical moment of Jack's political life, Bobby stood just off stage, loyal, ruthless, unblinking. When Jack ran for Senate in 1952, Bobby was there. When Jack prepared for the 1960 presidential primaries, Bobby sharpened every angle, every handshake, every county stop. When Jack faced the crucible of the Cold War, Bobby took notes in the back rooms and wrote the memos that would never make the history textbooks. Their partnership wasn't always pretty, and it wasn't always gentle, but it was unbreakable. And that partnership faced its greatest trial in October of 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis didn't begin with the grainy U-2 photographs that revealed Soviet launch sites tucked under Cuban foliage. It began with a question so simple that it was terrifying. What happens if we're wrong? The wrong assumption, the wrong interpretation, the wrong move. Jack gathered his advisors. Hawks, who wanted to bomb the hell out of Cuba before the missiles could become operational, diplomats urging caution, and generals who saw nuclear war as an acceptable risk. Bobby, at just 36 years old, walked into the room not as the president's brother, but as the one person Jack trusted enough to voice doubt. The ex-com meetings were not heroic debates. They were claustrophobic. They were tense. They often bordered on panic. And in the apex of that crisis, as Soviet ships approached the quarantine line and American forces readied for a confrontation that could have ended human civilization, Bobby became the quiet hinge holding sanity in place. It was Bobby, skeptical, direct, almost priest-like in his moral clarity, who convinced Jack that airstrikes would trigger retaliation. It was Bobby who urged his brother to consider the human cost before the political one. And it was Bobby who slipped into a clandestine meeting with Anatoly Dobrynin, the Soviet ambassador, carrying an offer that would diffuse the most dangerous moment in all of human history. If the Soviets removed their missiles from Cuba, the United States would remove theirs from Turkey. Quietly, later, without fanfare, no treaty, no headline, no ceremony, just survival. Dobrynin accepted the offer. The crisis de-escalated, and Bobby carried home the knowledge that he and his brother had walked within inches of nuclear war and survived. But survival in geopolitics doesn't guarantee survival in life. Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. If the Cuban Missile Crisis was the moment the Kennedy brothers saved the world, Dealey Plaza was the moment the world broke them. Jack's assassination didn't simply devastate Bobby. It shattered the core of his identity. The role he had played in the administration, protector, confidant, conscience, evaporated in the span of a single afternoon. He watched a nation mourn his brother, but he also saw something else. A political class reshuffling itself with unseemly speed. Lyndon Johnson consolidating power before the blood had dried. Hoover circling, eager to reclaim ground lost during Bobby's tenure as Attorney General. A country leaning into cynicism, unable to understand how such a charismatic, hopeful presidency could end with a rifle shot. For Bobby, the grief was total. He kept Jack's rocking chair, he kept Jack's letters, speeches, his notebooks. He lived in a house filled with echoes. And he internalized that grief in a way that fundamentally altered him. The Bobby Kennedy of 1964 was not the same man who had navigated missile diplomacy. He was softer. He was more reflective, more morally raw. He read Greek tragedy obsessively, not for comfort, but to gain understanding. Everything about his worldview shifted. Vietnam looked wrong. Civil rights looked unfinished. Poverty looked like a national stain. Bobby began to pursue causes Jack had admired, but never fully embraced. He walked through Bedford-Stuyvesant with local leaders. He traveled to the Mississippi Delta and literally sat on dirt floors with starving families. He debated segregationists in the South. He worked with Cesar Chavez and migrant farm workers. He spoke to Native American tribes about broken treaties and broken promises. He sought to understand America not as a campaign map, but as a wound. His speeches changed, his tone changed, his pace changed, and so did the country. Suddenly, the young people who once saw Kennedy politics as polished and distant saw something raw and honest in Bobby. The disenfranchised gravitated toward him. The working poor embraced him. Black Americans, despite his rocky relationships with civil rights leaders early in the administration, recognized in him a sincerity that transcended politics. And in late 1967, as Vietnam grew bloodier and the nation angrier, Bobby faced a decision that threatened to redefine not only his future, but the future of the country. Should he run for president? His advisors were divided. His family was concerned. LBJ despised him enough to consider re-election just to stop him. But Bobby saw the same thing the country saw: a vacuum, a crisis of faith, a moral collapse. And he believed, not arrogantly, but quietly, that he had a duty to fill it. On March 16, 1968, Bobby declared his candidacy. "I run to seek new policies to end the bloodshed in Vietnam and in our cities." The announcement was electric, irreversible, and polarizing. Plus, it was utterly transformative. The Kennedy myth, shattered in '63, suddenly had a heartbeat. Bobby was no longer the strategist behind the throne. He was the one walking toward it. And America, fractured and wounded as it was, followed him.
Our dogs are family, and they deserve food that treats them that way. That's why Ollie makes meals with fresh, human-grade ingredients you can actually recognize. Chicken, beef, carrots, blueberries, spinach, no fillers, no byproducts, just real nutrition slow-cooked to keep your pup healthy and energized. Shinier coats, better digestion, more energy, and with 5 protein-packed flavors like beef with sweet potatoes or turkey with blueberries, your dog may be eating better than you. Every plan is customized to your dog's age, breed, and activity level, and delivered right to your door in perfectly portioned, easy-to-serve packs. Simple, fresh, and made just for them. Now here's how you can try it. Your dog's well-being starts with their food, and that's why Ollie delivers fresh, human-grade food that your dog will love. Head to ollie.com/Ides. Tell them all about your dog and use code IDES to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/Ides and enter code IDES to get 60% off your first box. Most people can't name every financial account they have or what any of them are really worth. A 401k here, an old brokerage there, a few credit cards, maybe a forgotten savings account. It's a kind of financial fog, and it's costing people money. Monarch cuts through that fog. It's an all-in-one personal finance platform that brings your entire financial life together, cleanly, clearly, and instantly on your laptop or your phone. Link your accounts in minutes, see where your money's actually going, and take control of it. Monarch does the heavy lifting. Smart categorization, powerful visuals, and planning tools trusted by professionals. It's been named Best Budgeting App of 2025 by The Wall Street Journal, Forbes' Best App for Couples, and listed among CNBC's top fintech companies in the world. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code IDES at monarch.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code IDES.
This is Chapter 3, Bobby for President. A nation fractured, a hope rising. By 1968, America wasn't merely divided, it was ruptured. Cities smoldered, universities roared, Vietnam devoured sons and brothers by the thousands. Trust in institutions bottomed out, and the political establishment seemed incapable of recognizing, let alone repairing, the widening cracks in the national spine. Into this landscape walked Robert Francis Kennedy. Not the young operative who had served as his brother's enforcer. Not the grieving brother pacing the halls of Hickory Hill in the years after Dallas. But something else. Something rarer. A politician with a moral center sharpened by tragedy. Bobby announced his presidential run on March 16, 1968, in the Senate caucus room, the same chamber where he had stood 5 years earlier beside the casket of his brother. The air seemed charged with ghosts and expectation. Journalists who came ready to pounce found themselves strangely hushed. Even his detractors sensed the moment was heavier than politics. He spoke plainly. I run to end the divisions in America. Divisions of black and white, of rich and poor, of young and old, of war and peace. It didn't sound like rhetoric. It sounded like confession. Bobby's campaign broke instantly from the polished, consultant-driven politics of the era. He went to places candidates avoided, steel towns in decline, Kentucky coal fields, impoverished pockets of Indianapolis, native reservations, migrant camps in California. He didn't sweep in for photo ops. He stayed. He listened. And he forced the press corps to witness conditions many Americans had never seen. One journalist wrote, "We didn't see America until Bobby showed it to us." In another age, that may have rung melodramatic. In 1968, it felt painfully literal. After Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, Bobby was campaigning in Indianapolis. Advisors begged him not to speak. Race riots were erupting across the country. Police couldn't guarantee his safety. But Bobby insisted. He stood on the back of a flatbed truck in a poor neighborhood and delivered one of the most extraordinary speeches in American political history. Without notes, without preparation, and with a grief only he could articulate. He spoke of losing his own brother to a white man with a gun. He spoke of compassion over hatred, of understanding over violence. And he quoted Aeschylus. He pleaded for the country not to fall into the abyss. Indianapolis, one of the few major American cities that night, didn't burn. It wasn't charisma, it wasn't strategy. It was authenticity. And a country starved for moral leadership recognized it instantly. As the Democratic primary hardened into a three-way battle, Lyndon Johnson stepping aside, Eugene McCarthy carrying the anti-war intellectuals, and Vice President Hubert Humphrey clinging to the establishment, Bobby became the candidate of the edges. The young, the poor, the disenfranchised, black voters, Latino voters, Native Americans, blue-collar workers who remembered Kennedy's steal in 1960. He spoke about poverty without condescension. He spoke about race without fear. He spoke about war without euphemism. Crowds didn't just support him, they swarmed him. They touched him. They pulled at his clothes. They climbed telephone poles just to glimpse him. It felt less like a campaign than a movement, propelled by grief and hope, and something dangerously close to redemption. In Oregon, he lost, the first major defeat of his political life. But in California, the numbers were shifting. The energy was volcanic. During a visit to the San Joaquin Valley, he waded through a field of migrant farm workers who surrounded him like an incoming tide. One worker reached out and touched his hand. Bobby paused, and the man whispered, "You are the only one who cares." Moments like this weren't theatrics. They were seismic. Bobby was reshaping the Democratic Party, realigning the electorate, and rewriting what a presidential candidate could be. He was saying the quiet parts right out loud, and not as an accusation, as a promise. When he said, "We can do better," it didn't sound like a slogan. It sounded like a warning. By June 4th, 1968, it was clear. If Bobby won California, he would be the frontrunner, maybe even the inevitable nominee. He campaigned until his voice broke. He walked until his feet bled, shook hands until his fingers numbed. The night before the primary, he stayed at the Beverly Hills Hotel with his wife Ethel and their children. The same hotel where he would return hours later under unimaginably different circumstances. Election day arrived like a wave. Turnout surged. Latino neighborhoods went overwhelmingly for Bobby. Los Angeles pulsed with expectation. And late that night, as return solidified, the Associated Press confirmed it. Robert F. Kennedy had won the California Democratic primary. America had a new frontrunner, a new possible president, a new path forward. And within hours, on a short walk through a service pantry in the Ambassador Hotel, that path would be violently and permanently severed. History is not merely a sequence of events, it's a choreography of turning points. And in 1968, at the most volatile moment in modern American life, Bobby Kennedy emerged not as a politician chasing office, but as a man trying to redeem a country that kept breaking its own heart. He was the last flicker of a dream that had survived Dallas, Selma, Memphis, and the jungles of Vietnam. And he was about to step into the moment that would extinguish it. Next week in episode 2, we step into the shadows of Los Angeles in 1968. We explore the Ambassador Hotel, the fractured city around it, the strange path of Sirhan Sirhan, and the minute-by-minute reconstruction of the night Bobby Kennedy fell. It's one of the most heartbreaking chapters in American history, and one of the most consequential. The rise is complete. Next comes the fall. Follow us on Instagram at The Devil Within Pod, at EVO Creative, and at Ides of April Pod. Subscribe and follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. Leave a rating and a review. It helps more people discover the show. And share this episode with someone who loves history, politics, or true crime narratives. Don't forget to check the show notes for fantastic deals from the great companies that still support long-form storytelling. Quince, luxury essentials at affordable prices. Go to quince.com/devilwithin. Mint Mobile, premium wireless for $15 a month. Go to mintmobile.com/devilwithin. ExpressVPN, protect your data and access global content. ExpressVPN.com/devilwithin for up to 4 months free. Mood, THC and CBD gummies legally shipped nationwide. Go to mood.com/devilwithin for 20% off your first order. Ollie Dog Food, fresh, personalized dog meals. Ollie.com/Ides for 50% off your first box. And Monarch, the all-in-one personal finance app. Go to monarch.com/Ides for up to 60% off your first year. The Ides of April is an EVO production recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For EVO Creative, I'm your writer and host, Brandon Morgan.